G'day friends, I hope you're all doing monstrously well. Today we're going to take a look at turning this into this, using this and this. Should be good fun, so let's get cracking, shall we? Release the Kraken! Alright, let's get started. We'll try and break this down into steps, eh? Check it out. This part is fun. Take a good look at the piece you're intending to transform. Soak it in. Look at the shapes and the composition of the image. See if anything jumps out at you as something you could add to or transform to put a new spin on the whole thing. For me, this step is about shape recognition. This lady's beautiful headscarf, for example, is pulled up in an interesting way either side of her face. As soon as I saw this image, the shape of the garment instantly reminded me of the gaping maw of a catfish or some kind of mutant pug dog. So let's emphasize that, shall we? Sketchy time! Chuck a new layer on top of the existing artwork. Grab yourself a bright color that will stand out against the background and your sketching tool of choice. I like to keep it simple and usually go for the generic hard round brush with pressure sensitivity. And then let's get sketching. Keep it quick and loose, just try to emphasize those features you've discovered and give yourself a guide for later. In this particular case, I think I want to get rid of her face entirely and replace it with the inside of the creature's mouth. So I grab the quick selection tool, select her face, invert the selection and drop a layer mask on the painting layer to remove the face, revealing the background below.
Put some lines on the top.
Now that you've got a bit of a guide, get stuck in with some actual line work. I've grabbed a darker color from the background of the painting and using the same generic round brush, I'm going to jump onto a new layer down below the painting layer to draw in some simple details for the inside of the mouth. Most of this will be obscured by the teeth and whatnot that comes later, but because the painting layer acts as a bit of a mask, I can quickly drop in some of that detail on this layer below. Then on a new layer, on top of that original sketch layer, I can go in and refine those teeth and gums and add in the line work for the eyes, etc. This lovely lady is starting to take on a new form.
Color that sucker in!
So, creating a new layer underneath the line work for the inside of the mouth, I sample some of the red color from the headscarf of the gentleman next door and start laying in a mid-tone for the inside of the mouth. When you're drawing on top of an existing image, whether it's a photograph or a piece of artwork like this, I find it can help to unify the piece a little if you steal existing colors from the image you're working with. I keep the rendering of these cartoony characters pretty simple, usually just starting with a mid-tone, pushing that down for a shadow color, and then up for some highlights. Depending on the texture of the surface or the element that I'm trying to illustrate, I might go in with like an even brighter highlight color again to add some little sparkles of specular highlights where it's appropriate. And that can go a long way in selling the look of something that's supposed to be reflective or slimy, for example. Then switching off those layers below so I can see what I'm doing up above, I drop a new layer underneath the line work for the rest of the facial features on top and repeat the process. A helpful technique you can use when coloring elements like this is to paint in a solid color in all of the areas that you intend to add color to, then hit this little alpha lock button down here in the layers palette. And what this will do is it will lock the alpha channel of this layer, meaning you will only be able to create new marks on the part of that layer that already has pixel information in it. The rest of the image you won't be able to draw on. And that way you don't have to worry about going outside of the lines or any of that when you blast in the rest of your layers of color. This technique is called flatting, and it's commonly used in digital art and comic book coloring, for example. It can be really helpful and time-saving, especially when you're working on more complicated images and you can kind of separate different parts of the image with their own individual flats, and it makes selecting those different areas to work on them in isolation much simpler.
Right, hey, time to finish this off.
Another thing I'll often do is, once I'm reasonably happy with the simple rendering of an element, I'll grab a much darker shadow color and a soft round brush and skim in along the edges of some of the elements to quickly create some gradient shading. This is kind of a two-taste thing, but again, it can be a very quick way of layering in some depth and dimension. The same can be done in reverse for highlighting elements, such as these eyeballs. And then to add a very simple level of integration with the existing image you're working with, you can drop another layer between your new elements and the original image, and chuck in some quick shadows there as well, adjusting the opacity of that layer to get the desired effect. The same can be done as a layer on top to add lighting effects across the image. You know, doing these simple steps and bringing in these little basic atmospheric elements can really help to unify the whole mess. And that's about it, really. Pretty simple, eh? Let's jump over to the bloke's side and repeat the process. So I'm thinking I'll try something a little different with this guy. Because his head garment is a nice red color, I think it could work well as the inside of his mouth. I'm going to grab the lasso tool and select a chunk of the fabric and then copy and paste that onto a new layer. I can then transform that layer to fit at the bottom of his face to create a lower jaw. Then I chuck another sketch layer on top and throw in a rough guide for a tongue and some teeth to see if this approach is going to work. Once I'm vaguely happy with that, I will again get rid of his actual face and make some copies of that jaw element on layers underneath of the original art, twisting and transforming them to create a bit of a tunnel effect leading down his throat. And then I'll roughly chuck in some of the texture of that original painting in the deepest recesses of his throat, just by using the clone stamp tool and stealing a little bit of that background to chuck it in there so it feels a little unified. I then bring back my sketch layer, punch in and start inking out all of that dentistry on a new layer above. Moving on to the coloring phase for this guy, I go in and paint a flat for all those pointy sons of guns and work in the highlights and whatnot around the teeth as well. It was about this point when I realized that his tongue should be seen, sliming its way down the back of his throat. So I chuck in a new layer for that and ink that in too. There's also a fold in the cloth up above that looks a bit like a frowning eye, so I pop that sucker in there as well, and that kind of completes this bizarro dinosaur lookalike critter. Now the only thing that's kind of bugging me is the difference in texture between the original painting and the elements I have added. Over time the original painting has aged and cracked, especially in areas with darker and thinner layers of paint, and I'd like to get a hint of that into the new cartoony elements, so I drop a new layer on top of everything, grab the clone stamp tool again and make sure it's sampling all layers. Then by setting this new layer to an additive blend mode, I can sample some of the darkest areas of the original artworks and paint some of that cracked texture over these new sections. The additive blend mode means only the highlights will show up, which is kind of what gives definition to these cracks. You might need to play with the levels of the layer just to get the look you like. Sometimes I'll also chuck a bit of grain over the whole image to help pull it all together a little bit more, but this is an optional step and to taste as well. The goal with these isn't to try and match the exquisite rendering of the original art or to try and achieve a sense of realism. They're cartoons. The additions are supposed to stand out and be obvious. The goal really is just to try and get people to look at the world around them from a slightly more imaginative perspective, or, I don't know, to give them a glimpse into our crazy little world. Anyway, I hope that's been of some value to you.
So there you have it. A masterpiece monstified by yours truly. I hope you found something useful or entertaining there. If so, please do subscribe and give that bell a ring-a-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding. So you can be first in line to see the next one. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time with me. It really is the most precious resource we have, so use it wisely and get out there and make something. Go! Now!